Speaker, as a founding co-chair of both the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus and the Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus, I rise today to draw attention once again to the ongoing crises of poverty in America. And today I also want to draw particular attention to the impact of poverty on our national fight to stop HIV and AIDS. Mr. Speaker, December 1st is World AIDS Day, and this year marks 30 years after the first discovery of AIDS cases. The United States and the HIV/AIDS community globally have made tremendous progress in our collective response to this domestic and global crisis. We have reduced the stigma surrounding the disease and strengthened education and outreach activities which continue to prevent millions of new cases of HIV worldwide. The scientific community has improved the treatment of HIV and AIDS with antiretrovirals and combination therapies, and recent breakthroughs have revolutionized the way we think about AIDS. We have come a long way in our battle against AIDS. Contracting HIV no longer has to be a death sentence, but we have much more work to do. Not everyone who is HIV positive has access to these life-saving therapies. For the 1 in 3 Americans who are poor or near poor, HIV can still be the same death sentence that it was during the Reagan presidency. Today, nearly 1 in 5 Americans with HIV do not even know their status, and only about half of Americans who do know their status are receiving the treatment that they need. For the 100 million Americans either in poverty or living on the edge of poverty, much more must be done. Access to drug cocktails, high-quality health care, housing, and healthy foods that are all critical for people living with HIV are out of the reach for far too many. Mr. Speaker, 30 years later, we continue to shortchange HIV efforts in poverty-stricken communities. We failed to fully include women in outreach, education, and treatment, and with the resources for communities of color. This is just simply unconscionable. Women of color and young gay and bisexual men still receive the most severe burden of HIV in the United States. African Americans represent approximately 14% of the United States population, but accounted for an estimated 44% of new infections in 2009. And we know the numbers are on the rise in Latino communities and Asian Pacific American communities as well. These disproportionate rates of infection are not something that has happened in isolation. People of color continue to face higher rates of unemployment, incarceration, poverty, and near poverty than their white counterparts. We can and we must do much better than this. We must do more for those who are disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS, both here in America and around the world. We must provide the science-based, comprehensive sex education that is proven to reduce the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. And we must grow past old fears and engage all community stakeholders to truly end the stigma surrounding the testing and treatment of this disease. We must repeal laws that legalize and promote discrimination and hate. We must support and expand programs which provide critical support for people living with HIV and AIDS, and immediately, mind you, immediately extend treatment to the households, to the thousands of Americans on the waiting list for life-saving drugs. And of course, we must fully implement the National HIV/AIDS strategy and support Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. These policies are critical to next steps in our fight to stop this terrible disease. And we must protect the fraction of 1% of the federal budget directed to our global AIDS programs through PEPFAR and the Global Fund. U.S. efforts are dramatically reducing the burden of HIV and AIDS in developing countries, and failing to support these programs would have dramatic national security and diplomatic implications for the United States, not to mention the humanitarian disaster that would occur. That is why last week I was very proud to be joined by over 100 members of Congress in seeking appropriations of at least $5.25 billion for the PEPFAR program and $1.5 billion for Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I was proud to have played a role in overturning the unjust and ineffective HIV travel ban in 2008. And now, for the very first time in 20 years, the International AIDS Conference will be held in Washington, D.C. in July 2012. So let me encourage every member and their staff to engage with the leading researchers and doctors in the worldwide fight against HIV and AIDS. Our global leadership will never be more important than at this promising moment which we could move forward or we could go backwards. So I hope every member will join our bipartisan 60-plus members of the HIV/AIDS Bipartisan Caucus. Thank you.